I caught my live-in mother-in-law staging paranormal activity on my smart speaker to force me to sell my house cheap. I am a data analyst for a logistics firm, which means I don't make decisions based on vibes or gut feelings. I make decisions based on anomalies and hard data. So, when the smart home ecosystem I spent $3,000 installing in my mid-century ranch house started throwing bizarre, repetitive errors, I didn't assume my house was haunted. I assumed a circuit board was failing. My husband Mark and I bought the house 6 months ago. It was a beautiful, sunlit property with exposed cedar beams and a massive brick fireplace, left to us by his late uncle under the condition that we keep it in the family. We loved it. It was our sanctuary. Then 3 months ago, Mark's mother, Evelyn, moved in with us. Evelyn was an elegant, soft-spoken woman of 62 who wore heavy cashmere cardigans and always smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. She had recently sold her downtown condo, claiming the urban noise was triggering her severe anxiety. Mark, being a fiercely loyal and trusting son, immediately suggested she stay in our converted guest suite until she found a permanent retirement property. "It's just temporary, honey," Mark had promised me, kissing my cheek as we carried her matching luggage inside. "She's family. She won't get in our way." But Evelyn didn't look for a new house. Instead, she spent her days sitting in our living room, staring out the bay windows, and subtly making passive-aggressive comments about the upkeep of the property. "The foundation feels so cold in these old ranches," she would sigh over dinner, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "And the plumbing. I heard a terrible knocking in the walls last night. It feels so unsafe for a young couple. You two should really consider selling this place before the market tanks and you're stuck with a money pit." I ignored the comments. I knew the house was structurally flawless because I had reviewed the engineering inspection report line by line before signing the deed. The real anomaly began on a Tuesday in early May. Mark was away in Chicago for a 3-day corporate logistics conference, leaving me alone in the house with Evelyn. At exactly 2:14 a.m., I woke up because my teeth were chattering. The air inside our master bedroom was freezing, an icy, piercing cold that made my breath form a faint white mist in the dim light of the digital bedside clock. I reached for my phone and opened the Smart Home Hub application. The central dashboard layout showed a massive, unexplained spike in system activity. The smart thermostat, which I always kept locked at a comfortable 71 degrees, had been manually overridden and dragged down to 50 degrees, the absolute lowest limit the compressor could handle. I threw on a heavy bathrobe and stepped out into the dark hallway, shivered as the icy air bit at my bare ankles. As I approached the threshold of the living room, a low, distorted, metallic sound echoed through the darkness. It was a slow, rhythmic scratching noise, followed by a faint, high-pitched digital whine that sounded like radio static mixing with a human gasp. The sound was emitting directly from the premium smart speaker resting on the wooden media console. My pulse spiked. I walked quickly to the console, tapped the top touch surface of the speaker to mute it, and opened my phone's ecosystem logs. "Is someone there?" A soft, trembling voice gasped from the darkness behind me. I jumped, spinning around. Evelyn was standing at the edge of the hallway, illuminated only by the blue glow of my phone screen. She was clutching a heavy knit blanket tightly around her shoulders, her eyes wide and watery with what looked like pure terror. "Oh, Sarah," she whimpered, her lower lip visibly shaking. "You heard it too? It's been happening every night you're away. The cold, the terrible voices from the walls. I didn't want to frighten you, but this house, it's rejected us. There is something deeply wrong with this property." "It's just a system glitch, Evelyn," I said, my voice tight as I adjusted the thermostat back to 71 degrees from the wall panel. The speaker probably picked up a rogue Bluetooth signal from a passing truck, and the thermostat might have an active software bug. I'll run a full network diagnostic in the morning." Evelyn shook her head slowly, a grim, knowing look settling over her elegant features. "No, Sarah, it's not a glitch. The previous owners, your uncle, he died in that back bedroom, didn't he? Some energies cannot be cleared by an app. We need to leave. I know a wonderful real estate developer, a friend from my old church group, who buys properties like this for cash. No questions asked. We should sell it cheap, clear the debt, and move into a nice, safe-gated community." I stood in the freezing living room, staring at my mother-in-law. Her reaction wasn't normal. A normal 62-year-old woman experiencing a smart home malfunction would be annoyed or asked to call an electrician. She wouldn't immediately offer a cash buyer friend to take the house off our hands for a discount. I didn't argue with her. I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. Instead, I pulled up the raw system logs of the Smart Home Hub. As a data analyst, I know that software errors are chaotic. They happen at random intervals due to memory leaks or server drops. But as I scrolled through the historical log entries for the past 2 weeks, a chilling pattern emerged on the timeline layout. The thermostat override and the smart speaker audio activation didn't happen randomly. They happened at exactly 2:14 a.m. on Monday, exactly 2:14 a.m. on Wednesday, and exactly 2:14 a.m. tonight. A software bug doesn't care about a clock, a human does. Someone was intentionally triggering a sequence to make the house feel cold, loud, and unlivable. And the only other person sleeping under this roof was currently down the hall, pretending to pray for our safety. When Mark returned from his Chicago conference on Thursday evening, the atmosphere inside the house had shifted from quiet discomfort to an active psychological battlefield. Evelyn had spent the entire afternoon cleansing the corners of the living room with dried sage, purposefully leaving a thick, suffocating cloud of smoke in the air right before Mark walked through the front door. "Mom, what's going on with the smoke?" Mark asked, setting his suitcase down in the entryway and coughing into his sleeve. Evelyn immediately rushed to him, him, wrapping her arms around his neck and letting out a soft, theatrical sob. "Oh, Mark, thank goodness you're home. It's gotten so much worse." The freezing cold, the terrifying whispers through the speakers at night. Sarah tries to pretend it's just data glitches, but I can't sleep in that guest suite anymore. I'm physically sick from the negative energy in this house. Mark's face fell into a mask of deep protective anxiety. He looked across the room at me, his eyes pleading for an explanation. "Sarah, is this true?" he asked, his voice dropping into that stressed, placating tone he always used when his mother had an episode. "Is the heating system failing again? Maybe we really should look into that structural evaluation my mom mentioned, if the house is making her sick." "Mark, the heating system is perfectly fine," I said calmly, setting my laptop down on the dining table. "I ran a full circuit assessment yesterday. The hardware is responding exactly to the commands it receives." "Commands?" Evelyn interrupted, her voice suddenly losing its soft, trembling cadence and sharpening into a defensive hiss. "Are you implying that I'm making this up, Sarah? I am a guest in your home trying to protect my son from a disaster property, and you're treating me like a liar." "Mom, nobody is calling you a liar," Mark intervened quickly, raising his hands to soothe her. "Sarah is just analytical, you know that. Let's all just get some rest. I'll look at the electrical panels tomorrow." That night, after Mark fell into a heavy, exhausted sleep next to me, I stayed awake. I knew that trying to convince Mark with logic wouldn't work. He was too blinded by his filial duty to see his mother's manipulation. If I wanted to save my home, I needed undeniable visual proof. At 11:30 p.m., I quietly slid out of bed. I walked into my home office and retrieved a hidden security tool I had purchased during a prior privacy audit package for our firm, a professional-grade micro-lens spy camera disguised as a functioning, minimalist black digital desk clock. I walked into the dark living room, stepping lightly to avoid creaking the hardwood floors. I placed the clock camera on the top shelf of the built-in cedar bookcase, angling the high-definition, wide-angle lens to perfectly cover the entire living room layout, the media console, the smart speaker, and the main hallway entry corridor. I linked the camera to a separate, hidden partitioned network on my phone via an encrypted VPN tunnel, ensuring it wouldn't show up on our primary home router's connected device list if anyone decided to check. I went back to bed at 1 a.m. At exactly 2:12 a.m., my phone, resting face down under my pillow, gave a single, silent vibration. Alert, motion detected in living room zone. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't move an inch. I didn't want to wake Mark yet. I carefully slid the phone out, shielded the screen brightness with my blanket, and opened the hidden camera's live stream. The infrared night vision feed cut through the dark in perfect, crystal clear monochrome. The living room was completely empty for a few seconds. Then the door to the guest suite slid open. Evelyn stepped into the hallway. She wasn't wearing her heavy knit blanket, and she didn't look terrified or frail. Her posture was perfectly straight, her movements calculated and fluid as she walked directly to the kitchen island. She reached into the pocket of her silk robe and pulled out a secondary, unindexed tablet device, a cheap burner tablet I had never seen before. Her face was illuminated by the bright blue glare of the screen, and on her face was a cold, arrogant smirk that made my skin crawl. On the camera monitor, I watched her fingers tap the tablet screen. A second later, the digital display on our main living room thermostat clicked loudly. The night vision lens caught the numbers dropping rapidly: 71, 65, 58, 50. She was using a cloned administrator profile app on a rogue device to override our local home automation network. But she wasn't done. Evelyn walked over to the media console, standing right in front of our premium smart speaker. She tapped her burner tablet again. The speaker's top LED ring illuminated, and the low, distorted scratching noise began to fill the room. On her tablet screen, I could clearly see the user interface of a custom Bluetooth audio looper app. She had recorded a sound file of metal scrapings and synthesized vocal whispers, and she was streaming it directly to our speaker via a local wireless casting link she had secretly configured while I was at work. She stood there for a full 2 minutes, listening to the creepy audio loop with an expression of profound, dark satisfaction. She was actively constructing a haunted house narrative piece by piece to gaslight her own son into selling his inheritance for pennies. I turned off the screen, clamped my jaw tight to keep from screaming, and stared at the dark ceiling. I had the data, I had the video, and I had the absolute profile of her malice. Now it was time to build the ultimate public presentation. I waited until the next afternoon to execute the final phase of the audit. I needed to ensure Mark was home, but more importantly, I needed to check the final piece of the financial puzzle. I spent my lunch hour running a background search on the real estate developer friend Evelyn had casually mentioned over dinner. The data didn't lie. The developer was a licensed corporate entity called Apex Horizon Holdings, and when I pulled the state's business registration portfolio filings for Apex Horizon, I found the smoking gun. The secondary silent partner and majority shareholder of that holding company was none other than Evelyn Vance's own personal family trust. She wasn't trying to save us from a money pit. She was trying to legally scare us into selling a prime inherited family asset to her own shell company for a fraction of its market value, so she could flip the property for a massive corporate payout. At 6:30 p.m., I walked into the dining room. Evelyn had already laid out a beautiful, elaborate Sunday roast dinner layout. She had set the table with our finest porcelain plates, poured red wine, and was currently sitting next to Mark, gently patting his hand as he reviewed a stack of plumbing repair estimates. "Mark, sweetheart," Evelyn murmured, her voice dripping with artificial maternal warmth. "I spoke with my friend from the development firm today. He's willing to offer you $220,000 cash for the property as is. He'll even take care of the uncle's probate paperwork. It's a loss, I know, but your peace of mind is worth more than this cursed wood. Mark let out a long, defeated sigh, rubbing his temples. I don't know, Mom. $220,000 is barely half what the neighborhood is worth. But if there's a structural issue causing these weird atmospheric drops and noises, maybe you're right. Sarah, what do you think? I walked to the head of the table, entirely calm, and pulled out my phone. I think we should look at the latest system performance presentation before we sign any deeds, I said, offering Evelyn a cold, pleasant smile. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly, her fork pausing midair. Sarah, really? Must we look at your logistics spreadsheets during a family dinner? We are trying to solve a real emotional crisis here. Oh, this isn't a spreadsheet, Evelyn, I said smoothly. It's a live stream presentation. Let me cast it to the main living room screen so we can all see the infrastructure layout clearly. I tapped my phone screen, activating our smart TV's casting protocol. The massive 65-inch digital screen on the living room wall hissed to life, casting a bright beam of light directly across our dining table. The screen didn't display a performance chart. It flashed with a giant high-definition title card, the 2:14 a.m. Paranormal Activity Portfolio. Mark rose, his coffee cup stopping an inch from his lips. Evelyn's face went instantly, completely rigid. Before anyone could say a word, the television speakers blasted the night vision audio loop through the room. On the screen, the crystal-clear infrared footage showed Evelyn standing in our living room at 2:12 a.m., her face twisted into a sharp, arrogant smirk as she used her burner tablet to drop the thermostat to 50 degrees and stream the recorded whispers to our speaker. What? What is this? Mark stammered, his eyes darting from the television screen back to his mother, his face turning an angry, shocked shade of pale. Mom, is that you? The video advanced to a split-screen layout. On the left side, the infrared footage showed her tapping the tablet. On the right side, a high-resolution scan of the Apex Horizon Holdings corporate registration document flashed on the screen, highlighting her name as the primary financial beneficiary of the shell company. She's not experiencing an emotional crisis, Mark, I said, my voice completely level, clinical, and unyielding. She's running a corporate acquisition fraud. Your mother has been systematically overriding our smart home network every night to gaslight us into selling his uncle's house to her own holding company for a discount. The silence in the dining room was so absolute you could hear the faint click of the refrigerator compressor kicking on down the hall. Mark sat completely paralyzed, his eyes locked on the 65-inch screen as the video looped for a second time, showing his mother smoothly adjusting her silk robe while checking her burner tablet's connection logs. Evelyn's face went from a pale, translucent ash gray to a dark, furious crimson in less than 3 seconds. The frail, anxiety-ridden mother persona she had cultivated for 30 years dissolved, revealing the cold, calculating corporate operator underneath. She slammed her wine glass down onto the table, the red liquid splashing violently across our white linen runner like a fresh stain. You think you're so clever, don't you, Sarah? She hissed, her voice dropping into a venomous, guttural register that made Mark visibly flinch. You and your pathetic little logs. That uncle didn't deserve this house, and neither do you. He bypassed my branch of the family because he knew I would actually capitalize on the land value. This property belongs in my portfolio. Mark stood up so fast his dining chair tipped backward, crashing loudly against the hardwood floor. Mom, stop it! He roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of profound betrayal and raw grief. You lied to me. You sat there every morning telling me you were praying for our health while you were downstairs freezing our house and staging fake ghost noises. You tried to rob us. Oh, grow up, Mark, Evelyn snapped, standing up to face him, her eyes flashing with absolute contempt. It's business. You two are drowning in mortgage debt because you don't know how to manage assets. I was doing you a favor by taking this money pit off your hands before I redeveloped the entire lot into modern townhomes. Get out, Mark said, his voice dropping into a quiet, trembling whisper that carried more weight than his roar. Evelyn blinked, her arrogant expression faltering for a fraction of a second. What? I said, get out of our house, Mark repeated, walking to the entryway and throwing the front door wide open, pointing out into the dark suburban street. The guest suite lease is canceled. Your baggage will be sitting on the porch steps by midnight. If I ever see your name on our property title or see your car in our driveway again, I am handing this video file directly to the state attorney's office for corporate fraud prosecution. Evelyn looked at her son, realizing the psychological umbilical cord she had used to control him his entire life had been completely severed by a 1080p security file. She didn't offer a tearful apology, and she didn't try to kiss his cheek. She snatched her designer handbag from the console table, adjusted her cashmere cardigan, and marched out into the night, her heels clicking aggressively against the concrete steps. Mark slammed the heavy oak door behind her, locked the deadbolt, and leaned his head against the wood, his shoulders shaking as the reality of his mother's betrayal finally broke over him. I walked over to him, wrapping my arms securely around his waist waist, letting him lean his weight into me. We stood in the quiet entryway for a long time, watching the bright white light of the television screen illuminate the empty hallway. The ghost in our smart home was finally gone, and for the first time in 3 months, the air inside our house began to feel warm. The eviction of Evelyn Vance was followed by a complete, uncompromising digital quarantine of our home. I wasn't going to leave a single line of code vulnerable to her secondary devices. The next morning, while Mark was at the county clerk's repository checking the historical deed restrictions on his uncle's property, I brought in a specialized cybersecurity field technician to run a complete network infrastructure overhaul. We didn't just change the Wi-Fi password. We completely wiped the Smart Home Hub's local firmware registry. Wipe local Mac registries requires physical hardware reset. We performed a factory hard reset on the primary router and the Smart Hub panel, forcing the deletion of all cached administrative tokens and wireless cloning protocols Evelyn had secretly configured. Isolate LOT device traffic, creating a digital sandbox. We configured a dedicated, isolated virtual local area network, VLAN, solely for our home automation devices, thermostat, speakers, smart locks. This ensured that even if a secondary burner device connected to our guest Wi-Fi, it would have zero visibility or routing access to the physical hardware controls. Implement rolling biometric keys, eliminating password leaks. We replaced the standard alphanumeric password gateway with a two-factor authentication profile linked strictly to Mark's and my unique biometric thumbprint scans and dynamic security keys. Deploy dedicated network sentry logs, continuous monitoring. I set up a real-time command line monitor script that alerts my primary work device instantly if any unauthorized administrative override command is initiated from outside our primary residential coordinates. By Monday afternoon, the physical house felt entirely different. The lingering smell of Evelyn's dried sage was replaced by the clean, sharp scent of citrus polish and fresh air. The plumbing didn't knock anymore, because as the technician discovered, the knocking was just a low-frequency bass file Evelyn had programmed our smart subwoofer to play through the floorboards to simulate structural decay. Mark returned home at 5 p.m., carrying a fresh bouquet of yellow tulips and a certified letter from his late uncle's estate attorney. The attorney reviewed the deed, Sarah, Mark said, setting the flowers on the kitchen island and pulling me into a tight, relaxed embrace. The uncle put an absolute covenant on the land. It can never be sold to a corporate developer or split into townhomes for 50 years. Evelyn's entire scheme was completely illegal from the start. She didn't look at the raw data, Mark, I said, leaning my head against his shoulder. She just looked at the profit margins. I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he looked up at the minimalist clock camera still resting securely on the bookcase shelf. I wanted to believe my mom was just lonely and scared. I almost let her trick us into giving up our future. You don't need to apologize, Mark, I told him, squeezing his hands. You're a good son. But I'm a data analyst. My job is to catch the bugs before they destroy the entire system. It has been 1 year since Evelyn Vance marched out of our front entryway into the rain. The legal fallout from her attempted corporate acquisition scam was swift and final. When the estate attorney presented her family trust with the active covenant restrictions and our high-definition hidden camera logs, her legal counsel advised her to sign a permanent, unconditional waiver, relinquishing any future claims to her late brother's estate portfolio. She sold her shares in Apex Horizon Holdings to cover her legal fees and moved permanently to a retirement community in Arizona. We haven't spoken since, and her name has been completely expunged from our family ledger. Today is a gorgeous sunlit Sunday afternoon in late May. The air coming through the open bay windows is sweet, carrying the scent of cut grass and blooming lilacs from the garden. The exposed cedar beams above our heads gleam under a fresh coat of beeswax oil, throwing warm amber reflections across the living room floor. Mark is sitting on the floor by the brick fireplace, a toolkit spread out around him as he carefully restores an old oak rocking chair that belonged to his uncle. He's humming a quiet, steady tune, his movements rhythmic and completely at peace. I stand by the kitchen island, holding a warm cup of coffee, looking at the central smart home control panel on the wall. The dashboard display layout reads a perfect, unmoving 71 degrees. The smart speaker isn't playing static or artificial whispers anymore. It's streaming a soft, acoustic jazz melody that blends perfectly with the rustle of the wind in the oak trees outside. Our house doesn't feel cold anymore. It feels heavy, rooted, and beautifully alive. Hey, Sarah, Mark calls out, wiping a streak of wood stain from his forearm and looking up at me with a bright, open smile. What does the data analyst hub say about the evening forecast? Are we clear for a backyard barbecue tonight? I glanced down at my phone screen, reviewing the clean, uncompromised weather metrics on my dashboard layout. The metrics are perfect, Mark, I laugh, walking over to him and resting my hand on his shoulder as he stands up. Zero anomalies detected. The system is completely stable. He wraps his arms around my waist, pulling me close against his chest. As I look past his shoulder at the minimalist digital clock sitting quietly on the bookcase shelf, I realize that our home was never broken. It just needed an author who was willing to look past the manipulation and find the real truth hidden in the code. The copycat developers and the overbearing parents can try to write scripts to scare you out of your sanctuary, but they always make the same fatal error. They forget that true ownership isn't built on a deed or a corporate portfolio. It's built on the unshakable trust between two people standing in a sunlit room, holding the real keys to a life they earned together. And this life, this beautiful, warm, mid-century house was finally, completely, and securely our own.